Howdy there, Chuck. Hey, Chuck, can you hear me? Possibly not. Good evening, everyone. We're just standing by for a minute or two more, see if Mark Yeager is going to be joining us. Welcome, Chuck and Brent and Marge.
Hi,
Thanks.
how you doing this evening, Ken?
Good.
Good. I always get anxieties trying to get on this thing. I'm about ready to get out my rubber hammer and beat it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have a computer repair tool.
Yeah.
Here, I have one here in my office. It's a hammer, but it's not rubber.
Yeah, I know. So, yeah, wow.
And how are you doing, Chuck?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. I got, yeah, pretty good and stuff like that. I got to get glasses one of these days. Yeah.
This is Brent. I'm going to apologize in advance for potential lost signal and dropping off in where I am. And so I'll just put that out there here in advance that what I might drop off. I told Dan I'll follow up watching the recorded version.
Okay.
And then who's collecting the feedback? I said, I think by Friday at 10 a.m.
Yeah, that's me. So,
and then the other thing I might negotiate is why at 10 a.m. If I were to bake for 24-hour grace period on getting my feedback, are you trying to get everything turned into the county by Friday afternoon, or
that? Yeah, that's correct. They have given me a hard deadline.
Okay, well, that's out of your control then.
Yeah, I'm afraid.
All right, thanks.
So Brent, where are you today?
Well, I'm just coming off a work meeting, traveling to another event, and it's going to take me out of, I'm just triple booked. It's going to take me out of cell range potentially.
Okay, sure. Well, appreciate you tuning in as long as you can. Okay, I think we have everyone on that we need to. Debbie Guile is not going to be with us because she's in Tasmania, New Zealand and Tasmania at the moment. So she has sent in her comments already, though, for her review. So I'm going to gavel the meeting into session. What is today? Today's Wednesday, February 8th, 2023. We are convening another special session of SWAC and DSAC. This is kind of really a SWAC session. We'll be reviewing the draft of the work groups and subcommittees reports so far. I did want to mention that under normal circumstances, we would be talking about elections for chair and vice chair in this group. But these are not normal circumstances, so that's going to be put off until such time as we can indeed attend to those sorts of things. Yeah, anything more from members before we go into review of the document?
I just got here, had some problems getting the login, but who all is here? Should we have the members on screen?
Yeah, if they can, that would be nice. So right now, I think everyone is here except for Debbie Guile, who is out of the country.
So I could turn myself on screen, but I'm going to keep myself off because I'm going to be hacking and blowing my nose, and I've got COVID, so I'm hunkering down here. So
yep, indeed.
So I will turn my camera off and my.
Yes, well,
I could
thanks
leave my camera on, but I'm going to be eating my dinner.
Yeah.
So I think that cameras are optional this time around, folks, and that's perfectly fine. So I don't want to try to force that sort of thing unnecessarily. So
okay, I was just trying to find out what we were doing. So
yeah.
I might tune out too if I start losing my video, my bandwidth. So
yes, indeed, which is another consideration, I know. Okay, so let's go into review of the document. I had proposed in the agenda in order that we would look at the different sections. So we'd be starting off with the legal subcommittee, then the SMMP subcommittee's report, then the community education report, the past land use subcommittee, and then finally the A1 subcommittee on landfill size and life. Is that okay with everyone? You know, we could certainly move something up if people have something that they would like to make sure that we see. Yeah, Joel.
yeah, I mean, can we have some top level comments first?
Sure, that would be great.
Yeah, because I'm bothered by you know, the shape that this document is in that we received, and it seems like it's a moving target. There are big sections that are incomplete still, and then some of them are sprinkled with editorial notes. You know, I noticed Ginger Ruff has a whole lot of notes in one section, a couple sections, and recommending very, you know, small changes and big changes in wording. And the question is, how much is that going to change in the final report compared to what we're reviewing? And, you know, should we review those notes also? And then there's also been some, just comparing between versions, there's been some changes that seem to be made outside of the subcommittee meetings, as far as I understand. So I just wonder what we're working with really, and if this is a mature document.
Well, yeah. I don't think that it's been represented to be a mature document. It's been represented to be a document in process. And I think that you can indeed see just kind of how much in process it is through just the observations that you've made. I think some parts of it seem more mature, and then other parts of it really seem to be still in process. We were provided with the version that has kind of all of the ongoing discussions, editing, re-editing, et cetera, all the back and forth, the notes. So I think all of that is, is fair game for us to comment on. And I think that it's appropriate for us to just note, exactly what we see in front of us and what our observations about it are, including what you just laid out, right? I mean, that is indeed feedback, on the document, which I think is very appropriate for us to do. The public doesn't really have much access. In my point of view, the public doesn't really have much access to this document. It exists and the public can see it, but knowing where to even begin, I mean, it would just be totally daunting for me if I were just coming to it cold. So, that I think, so I'm just backing you up, I think, on, those observations. And the thing that I wanted to emphasize for us all is that we are taking our own notes at this meeting. They're not being recorded elsewhere. And so if people could please jot down kind of the points that they've made. I mean, I will try to remember some of them. I'm terrible at taking notes while the meeting is actually going on. So don't really rely on that. And supply me that feedback afterwards. Because otherwise we're just kind of speaking to ourselves, and that feedback is not actually getting to the work group. And I guess I'll also just mention, part of the dynamic here, right, is that we're providing feedback to the work group so that the work group can then get back to the subcommittees, and say, hey, we've received feedback about this particular point. I mean, this really seems to be, whatever that particular feedback is, we're providing that to the work group to then get back to the subcommittees, so that some of the really messy areas can be cleaned up. Are there other, kind of very top level reactions that people have to the document? Yeah, Marge.
Oops, looks like you're muted, Marge.
Marge, you're muted. Oh, I see. You're trying to get your sound to go. Okay.
Sorry. Okay, so I have my sound. I'm sorry. This new registration, it caused me to lose the actual screen with the people in it. So now I've forgotten what I was going to say is that if no one has comments, can you read what Debbie Giles' comments were?
Yes, I could. So her comments are very particular. Let me see if I'm sorry, I'm going to have to find them here on my desk somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and read you Debbie's comments. I should just mention that the comments that we are going to be submitting to the work group are not identified by person. So they are just comments which are coming from SWAC in general. I wanted to be a representative of Debbie in the meeting since she can't be here. And she didn't object to that. So I don't really want to single her out that much.
Yeah.
But maybe that would be without her explicit permission. That would be a little too much to just kind of bring that up.
Okay, I withdraw. in my
Yeah, okay, that's
suggestion.
fine. But I'll just say, she has comments which are kind of directed to subcommittees or reports, very much in general, just very overarching questions. She has comments which are directed to specific places in the text, particularly if there's something which is incorrectly stated, she is pointing those out. And then she has a number of statements which really are about, I would characterize them as being about values, where she's just saying, this seems wrong to me, it's really that kind of language, where she runs into something, some bit of news or, something in the report that actually, that she feels that are against, the values of the county, its community, that sort of thing. So I'll stop there, essentially, in talking about that. And those are all comments, I think those are all really relevant when we're talking here. And like I said, I think we are indeed kind of representing the public here, kind of the most, the best access the public has is as us as representatives when we're looking at the document. So if we don't have any more general comments, or shall we start with the legal subcommittee report? So yeah, Mark.
Thanks, Ken. So I'll go first on the legal issue subcommittee because I'm not sure how long I'm going to last here this evening.
Okay.
And so just a couple of 4 specific things. I have I don't know where the versions are now with their final report or where they are in their body, but I know that there is a section within their subcommittee report that talks about the rights and obligations of the county and Republic Services as it relates to franchise agreements and other things. And I would like to speak to 2 items. The first is in the 2020 franchise agreement, a reading of that agreement would give, I think, most people the impression that this proposed future expansion request has already been decided because there is a financial incentive that's built into the franchise agreement. And the franchise agreement basically says not if an expansion gets approved, but when. And so I am trying to put some thoughts together with regard to rights and obligations, getting back to that table. And what I would like to say is that one of the observations that should be made is that Republic Services does not have a right to an expansion. So there's nothing in the franchise agreement that guarantees them an expansion. And then the corollary to that, because the way they have set it up in their table is Republic Services, Benton County, rights, obligations, all that sort of stuff. The corollary to that is Benton County is under no obligation to grant an expansion. So that's the first thing relative to the rights and obligations. The next area that I am concerned about in the legal subcommittee's report is, I know there is a section in the legal committee subcommittee report, the legal issues subcommittee report, where they are trying to restrict what the Solid Waste Advisory Council can consider when making a recommendation to the Planning Commission. There's quite a bit of discussion in there about SWAC can't do this and they can't do that and they can't do this and they can't do that. Well, that's totally contrary to what the language is that's in the Benton County Development Code. It says that the SWAC makes a recommendation. It doesn't have those guardrails on that the legal issue subcommittee is trying to impose upon SWAC. So that's the third thing And then the final thing is they have I think some discussion in there about the importance of, or their perceived importance of, a 2002 memorandum of understanding that speaks to whether or not the operator of the landfill needs special permission to place garbage on the north side of the road. And what I've read in their discussion of that is they are trying to assert that that in fact that 2002 MOU negates any previous obligations by the landfill operator to comply with conditions of approval that have been put into land use actions. They're trying to say that that document says that at that point in time, November 5th, 2002, that the landfill was in complete compliance with all prior conditions of approval. And no way does that document say that. So those are the 4 items that I'd like to put onto the table for the legal issues subcommittee.
Okay, excellent. And I'll just add at this point in time that the document that I'm turning over regarding these comments really wants to refer to specific pages, or at least specific, get as specific as we can as to what we're referring to. So if in the written comments,
I'll try to do that.
Yeah. And that applies to everyone kind of throughout in their comments. I think it'll be helpful, for us to do that, because otherwise we're turning over kind of a big burden, to the work group. So Chuck, did you have something?
Sorry, Chair Eklund, there's 2 buttons to touch here and I'm a little off second base today. Okay, let me just say, in the report, are we going to review it tonight? Or just, could you give us a little outline what we are going to do tonight in regards to reviewing it, or whatever? That's just a leading question.
Okay, sure. Well, my process here is I'm really kind of assuming that people have looked at the document already and have particular notes that they would like to refer to. And that might also include questions, because heaven knows there are a lot of questions that come up when you're looking at this document. And of course, some of us here are on subcommittees and can kind of begin to answer those questions, or at least to shape them into what is going on. So Daniel is standing by, and I presume with the document at hand, so we can certainly call it up onto the screen, to look at those things. That's basically the process as I've seen it come up. I mean, we're going to go down the list kind of subcommittee by subcommittee, their reports, and of course certain of us have expertise with those. We started with the legal subcommittee, which none of us are on. I mean, no member of the public is on really. But when we move to other of the subcommittees, there are people here who have more experience with those. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. So yes, I mean, I had the same comment as Mark, just regarding SWAC's role, kind of as talked about in the legal subcommittee. And again, I think that SWAC is a representative of the community, in this process. And in particular, I think we're a representative of the values of the community. And so that is really something which I think it falls upon SWAC to represent in these meetings. And of course, that's a value that SWAC holds to the county. So that would be my comment, about that. Did anyone else have any other thoughts going through the report by the legal subcommittee? Joel, are you shaking your head? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there's, well, a couple of things. One of them also with regard to our own role and the discussion of what we could, what the sideboards that were being given to us. There's this, we understand now that we're responsible for looking at sustainable materials management and not just solid waste. And the entire document has some problems with inconsistency regarding what's meant by solid waste management versus sustainable materials management. It's only really in the section where we are scoping the SMMP where it's really treated correctly. But I think one big thing is that we should clarify this role of what, if, you know, sustainable materials, in my mind, that's what we should be looking at, whether this is conforming to what the county needs to do for sustainable materials management and not just solid waste management. And then a very specific issue is one of wetlands. And there's a couple odd things in this document, not in this section, but in the history section or the site setting. There's actually no mention of wetlands in E.E. Wilson Wildlife Area, which might have just been an oversight, but there's discussion of upland habitats. But, you know, this is a little strange because it was known as the original Camp Swampy. So wetlands are sort of the main thing around this area. In fact, I've got one in my yard. But then when the legal issues committee dealt with this, there's a really surprising statement in there in this table 2, which says, okay, primary jurisdiction is Department of State Land, which is correct. Of course, Army Corps of Engineers also has some jurisdiction. The county, whether the county is allowed to regulate is only if the county has identified significant wetlands at the site in a wetland inventory adopted through blah, blah, blah. And then there's a note that no significant wetlands are identified in the vicinity of the landfill on the county's adopted inventory. And this was so surprising to me that I contacted a local wetlands expert who just, he's, you know, recognized in this internationally in this. And he said, this is really not, this is very misleading. In fact, the county would only designate wetlands as significant if they were asked to do so by a municipality under the procedure that's been in place. So either Adair Village would say, we'd like to designate this wetland as significant at the county level, or Corvallis would say, we want to designate this wetland as significant at the county level. Otherwise, there's no procedure for the county actually to identify wetlands as significant. And so really this was just never done. And the county has never looked at wetlands in this area with the idea of identifying their own significant wetlands. But there are many wetlands that show up in the National Wetland Inventory. So that's, you know, really important that the Planning Commission is not given this information, which is really deceptive about the possibility for the county to say something about wetlands and impacts on wetlands, because it's as far as I understand, there are more things to look at here, but this is really a misleading part. So that should be corrected.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Very good, close reading. I mean, that is surprising. I mean, I don't know that much about it, but I do know that the E.E. Wilson is a wetland, you know, and it's right next to the landfill. I mean, there are wetlands actually on the land, in the landfill property as well.
Yeah, and those are identified also in the National Wetlands Inventory. So
Okay.
I'll include actually a map in my comments when I send my regular comments.
Okay, yes, very much appreciate that. Any other comments from anyone about the legal subcommittee report? Let's move on then. You know, perfectly free to go back to things or to jump around, you know, as the conversation takes us. So next up we have the SMMP subcommittee. So the subcommittee, which is indeed talking about helping to identify the request for proposal for developing a sustainable materials management plan when the county does that, which we hope is going to be soon. So I'm going to look to you, Marge. Do you have any thoughts to kind of kick us off on what's going on in this subcommittee?
Sorry, I'm having a problem staying on course and trying to also look at the document. Well, I think that the version of the SMMP document in this version that you're seeing, I think is improved to what it was before. And I think it more clearly delineates some of the values that Benton County drives in a sustainable materials management plan. I think it's more has more fidelity to the core values, Benton County core values, which I'm very much in favor of. And I think the idea of the circular economy and cradle to cradle, or making the beginning of materials responsible for all the way through life cycle, like that, and that Benton County is kind of uniquely targeted to values like that, sustainability and environmental values like that. I don't know if that's what you expected me to say, but that's kind of how what I'm thinking. But I'd like to hear other people's points of view, you know, having read it. What do you think?
Yeah. Joel, you got something?
I'm going to have a lot of detailed comments on this, but they're more at the nitpicky level, I think, at this point. Sort of a big one is why isn't this more front and center in the report? There is a statement early in the report that says that talks about the priorities for this whole process, and it said that is way up front in page 11, the work group with the concurrence of the county staff prioritized the following topics. And as I recall, the work group actually was pulled twice and wanted to put the SMMP higher up in the priorities. And we were basically told, back when I was still on the work group, we were basically told, no, we're not going to do that, because the charge from the commissioners is that we're going to focus on the land use criteria and these kinds of things. So that in itself is a little bit deceptive, but really the work group did not have a voice in this. It was set for us. And I think it certainly would be nice to see the SMMP brought farther forward in the report. And that is one comment I'll have, but that I don't have other major ones right now.
Okay, yeah. Well, I look forward to the detailed comments, but you know, those I think are just appropriate to send in writing. You know, your nitpicky comments. Yeah, I mean, I do remember it. I mean, you know, there's so much that's happened. It's all kind of a blur, but I remember in the first schedule, you know, like the very first schedule published for the work group, there was 2 hours of discussion time for the SMMP, you know, total. So it very much was a de-emphasized portion. You know, I think there was kind of a lot of feedback from the public members engaged in that process, you know, and so things have definitely changed. We now have an entire subcommittee kind of working on it, but it has been kind of clawing its way up into significance. I have some just observations, you know, about the actual process that the SMMP subcommittee has gone through, which I've just found off target. And by which I mean the kind of early on in the process, there was a nice moment when we were looking at, when the subcommittee was looking at other past reports that other counties have done, for example. But then from that, there was this long period where we were essentially just copying those, what other counties had done. And there really was just kind of an entire focus on going through like each of those reports and making sure that we had something in our, table of contents that corresponded to whatever it is that they had in their table of contents. Even when those things, had to do with like transfer stations, which we don't have any, that still appeared, kind of in our timeline. And so it was very much this sort of detail looking for a purpose. And I think that sort of approach has kind of led us to, a document that the values part, which I think was really what was the prime thing for us to contribute, kind of seemed to make its way actually into the report late. And to me, it's still, it still looks like an early draft of those things. It's not really organized well. And I apologize because I haven't really kept up with the latest iterations of that one, just because I've been rather mired in other subcommittee work. And so that's just part of the process where I felt that it would have been better for me, if we had looked at those other ones, called the parts that we really liked, and started building kind of from the things that were very important to us in the county, and then kind of fleshed it out later with, whether or not there was, you're going to have a section on transportation or whatever. But there was such an attention to detail, kind of inappropriately, I thought, for, so it was a sort of bottom up process that was going on. And let's see, I had some other observation also. Oh, well, and then in the subcommittee, we spent a lot of time, we were kind of directed to spend a lot of time specifying things that aren't really appropriate for us to be specifying. So like there are questions like, what is the time period that the SMMP should cover, for example? I mean, I can answer that question from kind of a values point of view, but I don't really know what $500,000 buys you. If it buys you a 20-year plan, for that matter, how long is the process going to be for the SMMP? I don't know how much time $500,000 buys you in terms of consultant time, or what's their burn rate? Is it typically 6 months, a year? I mean, that's how long it's going to take then, if that's what the budget is going to be. And so there were a lot of kind of nitpicky questions about that, about what's the grading matrix for the report, which I can answer in kind of a very general way. But if you're asking me actually to specify, what the percentages are actually going to be, one, I don't feel entirely qualified to do that because I don't understand how the whole package comes together. And two, presumably the county is going to hire someone who actually does indeed assemble those packages. So when talking with people who actually have more experience about this particular, the way the county operates, they're just saying, well, these are inappropriate questions for you to be asked. And so I just, am regretting now kind of all the sort of wheel spin spent digging up those levels of detail. When I wish, I guess, that I had spoken up more at the time, because I could kind of feel like this was, out of my wheelhouse, if you will, out of our wheelhouse. But of course, I'm not the entire committee. There are other people there that know more, et cetera, that sort of direction. But when I look at the document, there are parts that I just kind of wish, and maybe this will be actually part of what happens, is where they just get shrunk, because, although we came to we had conversations about them. I'm just not certain that those conversations really carry much weight or should carry much weight.
Yeah, to be honest, I also felt that the written documents that were turned in were not, did not have fidelity with the conversations that we had. And we didn't always get a chance to comment on what was being brought forward in a written form.
Yes, I very much felt that also. And so it's funny, I mean, in my experience, on subcommittees, one, I've been very active in writing stuff, which is the other subcommittee I'm on. And then on this subcommittee, I really wanted to kind of not do that. I didn't want to impose, and in both subcommittees, the results have been disappointing. In both cases, I've really met with resistance, resistance in actually getting things that we talked about into the document, in a way that, that we're trying to express. And then, in the other subcommittee, just experienced disrespect for the things which I actually contributed in writing. So, it's hard to negotiate this process as a member of the public, is the experience that I'm having. So I'm sorry, Chuck, have you had your hand up for like ever?
Well, it keeps falling down, so somebody's slapping my hand. So I just want to say, for me, it's been a learning experience. It's not that I'm the expert and so forth, but I value the community and the county and everybody's, even the facilitators, work on this. This is not to say that this is going to resolve everything. The county has already given us a letter, as a path forward with consultants. So there will be times now with our accumulated knowledge that we can ask pertinent questions to the experts in this, especially on all the resources that are out there, with first of all the landfill and if you will, all the other natural resources that are out there and how they can cooperate. And if they can't cooperate, then what alternatives we have. And that way the experts can look at it from an economical standpoint. If you want to shift waste, if you will, or refuse from point A to point B, what's the cost of that in highway dollars, and even better, so the economics starts playing out with the experts, where you can look at supply and demand curves and so forth like that. But this has given me time with everybody else there to put ideas, and I sometimes can put better ideas in paper than, I'm not a very good orator, nor do I have a photogenic base for this camera here either and stuff like that. But I just wanted to reassure everybody, this is not the stopping point. This is the starting point. We just got over the bridge now, and will be a transition, especially with the sustainable materials. I look at that as really in a box there, with the sustainable materials maybe on top of the box, but there's a relationship, just like salt and pepper. We're not going to do away with solid waste either, and so forth. So they have to go hand in hand. And it's just like the landfill out there. The landfill is really finite on the resources that the disposable site has and so forth. So there's an expansion there, and there may be other economical benefits not to expand, but the experts, fortunately, the county has the foresight to see that with the director's letter there giving us there. So it's coming into focus what it really is now, with everybody else joining in and getting comments in. It's not the end of the game, it's just the starting of the game. And I'm sure it will be, in the long run, a net benefit for the county.
Sure. Now, Chuck, you were talking about the SMMP kind of specifically, or were you talking about the document or the process, the work group process as a whole?
Yes. I just, you know, I just want to kick ideas around a little bit. You know, what I like is when Joel says something or Mark says something or Ginger says something, you know, what are they saying? What's the perspective there? And you know, sometimes I put on my rosy glasses, and it's nice to look from their points too, so we can get the best points in there in this document, so the experts can sit down and that way they're way ahead of the game. They don't have to repeat all this process. They've got the communities and everybody else into this equation. So we're deep down in the defensive field to the 20, right there where the field goal is the way I'm looking at it. Just another metaphor.
Yes, I certainly, I don't know, I think maybe I would diverge too much here into kind of problems that I have with the process. I mean, I'm still kind of thinking through exactly what happened, and I'm talking about the SMMP process in particular, you know, and how exactly it kind of got, from my point of view, ended up spending so much time on stuff which was not really what I wanted to be talking about. So I'm sorry if I kind of took a long time to kind of say that very simple point, but I certainly appreciate what you're saying, Chuck, you know, about the process in general. You know, there are a lot of person hours going into this. You know, there are a lot of people who are engaged with it. There are a lot of people bringing forward a lot of different perspectives, you know, in the various groups that we have. And there's a lot of truth emerging, you know, about this particular subject. I mean, you know, clearly there was some catching up to do that the county needs to do. And it seems like that catching up is, you know, actually being accomplished. So, okay, back on track. We're talking about the SMMP process. Were there any other, oh, Joel, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
It's okay. I just raised it a second ago. Yeah, there is one sort of big point, I think. You know, we had the issue of best practices, and I reminded that in the key findings, there's this statement that many best practices and model SMMPs exist in Oregon and beyond, which is a little strange. I mean, best is a superlative, it's not a comparative. So you expect there will only be one or two really good best practices. But you know, when we're talking about best practices in Oregon, during the work group, we had emphasized also looking at international models. And this really seems to downplay that, the idea, which I thought was agreed on by most people in the work group, that actually we should be looking at international examples and out of state examples, and to say, sort of put Oregon up front in that is a little concerning compared to where I thought we were headed with that. And that was my
Yes.
main.
I think that's a very good observation. So I think that's important to take back to the work group, and then for that to come back to the subcommittee. Anything else? Anyone else on the SMMP? We can come back to it. Thank you for those comments. So we're going to move on from there to community education. So Marge, that's you, isn't it?
Okay. Well, I think that community education, the aspect of the subcommittee, I actually spent most of my time working on the history part. But I think a lot of really good work went into the community education part. And I think that we had really good cooperation from Corey Grogan, our county public information officer. And tonight, the Justice System Improvement Project is holding a big open house. And I'm kind of sorry that we scheduled this meeting against that meeting, because I think that in the manner of holding an open house. That's just the kind of feedback kind of we needed for this project in order, because that's what we are going to eventually want to do with this, the product of this work group, this report, is hold an open house and talk to the community about what do you think? Or have we hit the right spots, et cetera. However, the other thing that I found in writing this history, in assisting in writing this history part, is that over time, SWAC and the community had lots of influence on practices, solid waste practices. And the SWAC continually put notices, they call them tombstones for the way that they're shaped, you know, but constantly had information out there, soliciting input from the community, saying at this meeting we're going to talk about this and this, you know, public comment welcome, and you know, this and this time. And that did not happen in this process. So something, you know, however, I think that the community outreach part of the subcommittee E has made a lot of progress towards identifying. I mean, of course, we still have a newspaper, and you know, there's kind of no excuse for not having some, you know, notices in that newspaper. But today we also have many other communication paths that people get information through. And this subcommittee and, you know, working with Corey, I think did a real good job of identifying what some of those paths might be, and beginning to make progress towards reaching the community. Yeah, so kudos to the other the other half of our subcommittee.
Yep. So thanks for bringing that up, Marge, because I did also want to talk about, just to jump back to SMMP for a bit. You know, I feel like that is something that, you know, is in the SMMP, is really talking about public outreach, but it's really talked about in kind of 20th century terms. You know, it doesn't really, you know, like for example, the conversation has been about, well, like how many public meetings are there going, you know, or will the SMMP process have? You know, that is just not really modern thinking about how public outreach can be conducted. And so, you know, again, that's kind of looking backwards. You know, I mean, one of the problems, right, of looking at old materials management plans like of other counties is they did their management plan in 2014. They did their management plan in 2007. You know, well, we're doing ours in 2023. So, you know, or thereabouts. So we should be careful to be more current, you know, and not kind of backwards looking, but forwards looking. Yeah, so I'm just, you know, again, jumping back to SMMP, but I'm really glad to hear essentially that, you know, that you have, that it's been a good experience, and it seems like a lot of really good valuable work has been done. You know, the history component I think is really important too, you know, especially to us here at SWAC. I mean, we don't have any institutional memory. You know, our institutional memory is currently, you know, vacationing in Tasmania. So, and, you know, and her memory goes back to what, you know, 2020 or 2019 or something like that. And so it's very easy for us to really lose, you know, in SWAC and DSAC to really lose the thread of what we should be doing, what we can do, you know, what we should be empowered to do. And so the history is really important. So I think, Joel, you had your hand up, and then I think Chuck, you also. No, okay. Chuck, did you want to?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Let's see, I just want to make a comment on the SMP.
Yeah,
I read them over like the shoots and everything like that, but I just want to say that even though that they've had their SMPs, Benton County is, if you will, somewhat unique. In other words, it has, of course, the county, and then of course it has a landfill, but what's just as important, the license with other counties too, when together to utilize Coffin Butte when the other ones were closing and so forth. So that impacted them. Benton County was good enough to, look at that to the Chemeketa plan or one of those plans too. And I think that's really the focus too, is all the time we talk, if you will, we look at Benton County, but really the solid waste management and the waste streams are more on a regional perspective. And even if landfill, even if you would, the landfill closes today, Benton County stands shoulder to shoulder with everybody else that was going there, where to go next. So I think that one eye, if you will, needs to be at Benton County, and then another eye also is on the regional waste streams, though, because they collectively come together and they still need to focus on everything that Benton County is doing.
yeah. So you remind me, Chuck, of course, that we wanted to start up a we did start up a subcommittee here in SWAC, which was really in re-engaging SWAC with exactly that, to start conversations with other SWACs in other counties, just to get the line of communication open. But that is, another process which has been shut down essentially by our curfew.
Well,
Yeah.
well, I'm counting my blessings there, because we got enough on our plate right now, so that might be a blessing in disguise to keep us focused, Chair.
Well, I think
Chuck-
that's a very good point, Chuck. Yes, I think your point. Yes, yeah, very well taken. I'm sorry, Joel.
Oh, I was just going to say, with Chuck and I here, we have the quorum of that subcommittee, I think. So,
Well, I think actually it's 100%, isn't it? Because wasn't John McAvoy the
yeah, that's right.
third member? Yeah. So 100%. Okay. Did anyone else have any other comments? I must confess that I have not really dived into the community outreach part, the education and outreach committee work. And in part that's because it just seemed to be going along just fine. So no more, if there are any more comments on community education, we'll certainly, I'm sorry, Joel.
Yeah, I can make a positive comment. I thought I was really encouraged by the idea that came from this subcommittee on notifying people within a certain radius of the landfill, and apparently even including Polk County residents who've been pretty much left out of things in the past. So it's not clear to me, the recommendations that come out, how much of those will be taken on board, but I thought it was very thoughtfully done.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm very glad to hear that. Okay. So we move on to the past land use committee. So I'm wondering if Mark can, I think, as our representative in that subcommittee. Sorry to tap on you there, Mark, but.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Well, let's see, I guess you can see me. All right. So the past land use committee has been an incredible amount of work to try to sort through. I think there are 86 different conditions of approval over since 1974. And so we have been working through a number of those things. There have been several times in which we've had to respond to assertions and input from the legal issues subcommittee. We spent many hours just discussing the introductory few paragraphs to the section, and that still has not yet been resolved. And I think that from my perspective, I think the most we can expect anyone to do is to read the findings and recommendations that are in the main body of the report. And I have developed and submitted, and they are not before you because they have not been put into this draft number 3, a half a dozen overarching findings. And I think those are significant, both considering where we are now and moving forward. And though that's going to have, well, I hope that comes out in a future version of this draft report. But I'm happy to hear what other people's thoughts are there. I'm, way deep into the weeds, and I don't really have anything to share with the group at this point.
Sure.
But I'll try to answer questions. And likely after this section is discussed, I'm going to go back to bed.
Yes, as you should. Thank you very much for hanging in there, Mark. So does anyone, I'll just open it up. Does anyone have observations from reading over that portion? Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, I seem to have caught Mark's cold or COVID through the wires here. But my main concern about this is everything is unresolved. There's all these conditions of compliance, and all I see in this document is remains to be resolved. I remember the exact phrasing, but almost in fact, I think every single one, they've just all been left unresolved. Even the ones that seem like they should be fairly obvious were, for instance, screening. I mean, it's obvious the landfill is not being screened. It's obvious that the cliffs of Coffin Butte have not been restored to anything looking like what was expected. There's no grazing on the landfill. So even things that seem extremely obvious have not been resolved so far. So we're not seeing the output of this committee yet. And I'm wondering when that's going to happen, and we'll have a chance.
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah. So the application of that sort of coverall assessment phrase that's in each of the conditions of approval was put in there really as a placeholder. There are a number of different things at play. I think I mentioned earlier the 2002 MOU, in which the Legal Issues Committee is asserting that it doesn't matter what happened prior to 2002, compliance or no compliance, because they have asserted that the 2002 memorandum of understanding wipes all of that out. And so therefore, from their perspective, the landfill is in compliance with all prior requirements to 2002. There are some members of the subcommittee that are not in agreement with that. And so I don't know how it's going to be resolved. There are some that seem to be quite obvious with regard to things like screening. And as you mentioned, Joel, there's a lot of discussion and debate about what closure means. The landfill says that certain cells are closed, but they're not really closed from DEQ's perspective. And so therefore, you're not going to see any grass growing or any of those sorts of things. What we've learned in this process is that, and I think we're seeing this happen up in River Bend at the quote unquote almost closed landfill, that essentially the landfill operator gets to decide when they're really closed and work with DEQ. So until the landfill stops accepting waste, the landfill is not in a closure condition, even though they will tell you that certain cells, cell 2, 3, cell 1 and 1A, that they are closed, but they're not technically closed from a DEQ perspective. So the closure requirements relative to grazing and all that sort of stuff don't kick in until everything is closed. That's what I've learned in this process. So I am sorry that we are where we are. I do think there is a divergence of opinion. If you go into the main body of the report, you will see that in many cases, the staff believes that the operator was in compliance, and Republic Services agrees with staff. You can look at the comments. Staff says in compliance, Republic says that we agree with staff. And then in the middle section, there's a lot of discussion and commentary that were put together by both myself, Catherine Bisco, and Ed Patera, because we really researched and read each and every one of the conditions of approval and tried to make some judgment as to whether or not there was any evidence in the record relative to compliance. And one of the overarching things that hopefully will be in the findings is that Benton County has stated that they did not and do not have the resources necessary to monitor and enforce compliance with conditions of approval. That is the responsibility of the applicant. And unless there are any complaints filed by someone, the county will not, and they do not monitor or enforce any conditions of approval.
Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That was very enlightening. I'm just question that's been on my mind is we know that we're getting a franchise fee from this landfill, and it's substantial. Has there been any discussion of whether some of that franchise fee should have been or will be devoted in the future to actually actively monitoring compliance?
Well, of course, that's not part of this subcommittee's charge, but I think there is a draft recommendation, something to that effect. But again, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. There's a lot of discussion and debate about whether or not some of the older conditions of approval, like screening, for example, which were supposed to be imposed in 1983, whether or not anyone's ever going to require the landfill to do any screening. And so there is an observation that is quite clear that the county does not monitor or enforce conditions of approval. And I think that's contrary to what people think happens when you go through a land use review process and conditions of approval are imposed. The idea is that the conditions of approval are imposed in order to mitigate adverse impacts of a particular land use. However, if they're not monitored or enforced, it seems like it's pretty hard to ensure that compliance is done. So.
Yeah, let me just note that although spending franchise fee money may not be part of the charter for this particular group, it is a charter for us in SWAC. I mean, that is a thing which is specifically called out in the SWAC, the bylaws, and I think the county code essentially is that we are to advise how franchise fees are to be spent. So that certainly seems to me to be relevant as a SWAC response essentially to what we're hearing here, is that that it would be very appropriate to begin spending money to actually because otherwise conditions of approval are clearly just, ink on paper. They don't have any effect. And I'll just pick up on, what Mark was talking about. I mean, it's a thing that I got from reading over what the past land use subcommittee has been looking at, is just that there are so many things that were, or are complaint driven, and there's absolutely no pipeline, about that. It's kind of only emerging through this process that these things actually exist as a complaint item. And so, where is the complaint page on the county website, for example? It does not exist. I don't know if it's ever existed. Where is the notification for people, like something in the paper, that, hey, if you think the landfill is ugly, then you should, write, a letter or whatever. There's really been no pipeline for getting those, for letting the public know that they're empowered. And clearly, part of this, I mean, is, to me, it's just very inadequate lawmaking or, condition making or whatever, to say, well, for example, we won't require screening, unless the public complains that the landfill is ugly. I don't think you drive by the landfill and are motivated, to say, hey, the landfill is ugly, because you drive by it tomorrow and it's still ugly, and you drive by it the next day and it's still ugly, et cetera, et cetera. So what, are you supposed to file a complaint every day, about that? That clearly is something where you need some sort of representative who can really say, I think most people looking at this would say that this is really an eyesore of a view. And I don't know, the other day I drove by Short Mountain, the landfill down by Eugene. I had never noticed it before, because they take care, it's right by the freeway, very similar circumstance to Coffin Butte, but they take care to essentially maintain that side of, that view shed is not really, as confrontational as what we've got. So, I mean, that's just one example, but, they're certainly looking at what has happened with past SWACs and DSACs. It seems like the pipeline by which complaints are even registered is broken, has been broken. I mean, when was the last time that we submitted, the required report to DEQ? It seemed to me last year when I asked Daniel for an example of what that report should look like, he couldn't come up with one, which I found surprising at the time. So that was, again, something that we were pursuing, but then the curfew descended. And so that's, kind of all on hold. I'm sorry, I'm going on. And Chuck, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I almost forgot what the question was and what the answer was, but bear with me. If I understand it correctly, correct me wrong, with the there's two themes here: condition and complaint. Now, the conditions of history are real good in a sense. It's from a history perspective, although that they, for just the sake of argument, they've been negated from the future franchise or the existing franchise. But the historical perspective doesn't mean that later, if another CUP comes forward, that if there's a consensus of a condition, that cannot be brought back into the new one. Do you understand what I'm saying? It doesn't. The new one starts anew with where we're at, and it's just like other laws, if you will. Some are proceeding, you can bring them forward, but we find that laws in the 1858 for crossing, jaywalking, and spitting gum on the curb we may not want to enforce that. You know, just as a ludicrous example. But what I'm trying to get at is the history is really important to have those, even though that they're not impinging right now front and center. But if it is a relevant condition, I think the county attorney says, or even a director, those conditions can be brought forward if they're relevant and so forth like that. So don't give up hope on the history. Fortunately, everybody's time has brought that in now, so you've got a regular reference to it and can come back to it and so forth. And sometimes technology even changes that you don't need the conditions too. So everything has to be looked at in today's perspective, looking back or forward and so forth like that. And it's hard to do, but you know, we've got a lot of information, and I still look at it that it's brought it, everybody's help has brought it down to the 20-yard line, if you will, keep with that analogy.
So Mark, I see your cameras come back on.
Yeah, I'd just like to respond to Chuck to say that want to make sure that there is clarity that the current franchise agreement has nothing to do with prior land use decisions. Those are two separate processes. Land use decisions are they're in their own legal bailiwick, quasi-judicial decisions that cannot be wiped away by the franchise agreement or cannot be modified by the franchise agreement. So just want to clarify for everyone that there's no relationship between a franchise agreement and land use decisions.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. Yeah, that's I had not really understood that. Chuck,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. There's also, I mean, hand in hand with that is a DEQ permit process, and that can sometimes bring conditions into it too. But I think everything is open to public opinion and the conditions that they want to put onto it and so forth like that. So I don't want to lose hope of that.
Let's see, I wanted to just take a moment right here. Brent, it seems like you're still with us. I know it can be hard to kind of break in when your camera is off. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to, if you have had thoughts, you know, kind of in the past.
No real thoughts. You know, I'm pretty technically focused, and so, you know, maybe more view of the document, but no immediate comments. I'm learning a lot just by listening to veterans on the committee.
Yes, indeed. Okay, that's fine. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I did want to give you a spot. And you bring up a really good point. Because I certainly know that I'm going to go back to the document, you know, to the whole thing, and just reread everything. And because I've learned a lot about kind of what the salient issues are. And so I encourage everyone to do that with a pen in your hand, you know, or the keyboard in your hand, to jot down, you know, your thoughts, and again, to get them to me by Friday at 10 a.m. so that I can put them into a document.
Right. And then my focus, you know, personally is what I'm trying to glean from it is, you know, there's a lot of information in there. As far as I'm on the advisory committee, I'm going to be very what's within, you know, my or the county's control and what is not. And so that's what I see a lot here, is that there's a lot at state level. And honestly, the county does hold a lot of cards. One of the big cards they hold is the planning commission, whether approvals. Anyhow, I'm in weeds, but
So unfortunately, Brent, I think we just lost your signal. So you, at least I was hearing you essentially, you know, more or less like an alien. So we lost the last part of your comment, but it sounds like you have got a plan of action, you know, going forth from this meeting, which I think is really valuable. Are you still with us? Or?
Sorry for that. I'm still with us if you can hear me, so otherwise, then post me if you can hear me or not.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're completely breaking up. I think he just passed out of range or is about to. So Daniel, you had your hand up, or? I guess not. Okay.
Oh, thanks, Ken. I just wanted to briefly, it seemed like a good opportunity just to mention that for folks sending in those comments to you, if you could also copy Benton County Talks Trash at co.benton.or.us just to keep those records public. We'd really appreciate it.
Okay, sure. You can also remind me, Daniel, and so I can check and make sure that if there's anything that doesn't have that CC on it, I can forward that on.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more comments about past land use? So I'm very much going to go back to that section and reread it. I think Mark's analysis is really helpful about kind of what the dynamics are there. So now let's move on then to the A1 subcommittee, which is the landfill size and life. And so let's see. Who wants to kick that off? Not Mark. I think Mark has gone to bed, which is good. Did you want to talk about what's going on with the landfill size subcommittee there, Chuck? You can say no.
Well, short, there's 174 acres, as we know. There's 6 cells. That's pretty explicit. But when it gets down to longevity, now that's the tricky question right there. If it's relative to Coffin Butte, if you will, the cell life and the landfill life is contingent on or part of the land reserve if it can be converted to a landfill. So if it can't be converted, then we're right back to the 14 years capacity in cell 6. So it's pretty explicit for the first 2 steps, but there's a lot of conditions, or if you will, working through credible scenarios, if you will. And Ginger brought some forward there too and stuff. So maybe we'll have a good conversation here next week or next time we meet and kind of close everything out and stuff. So I appreciate everybody's hard work anyway.
Yes, indeed. So yes, I mean, I'll just echo what Chuck said. So, you know, the 3 things are finding out the size, the capacity, and the longevity, right?
Yeah.
And so those actually are kind of amazingly complex subjects. The first 2, whereas I would have expected them to be a little bit more straightforward. There's a lot going on with those. And of course, what Mark was referring to, you know, about cells not being exactly closed. I mean, settlement goes on, you know, there are new ways to kind of, I'm not going to bore you with all that, but
no, but excuse me,
go
Chair.
ahead.
Just from a technical, I think Republic and DEQ says when they're done, they're capped. They use a different terminology there. So when it's closed, it's not really closed, but when it's capped, it's capped. And that means, if I understand them correctly, that they're not currently putting any solid waste into it. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So the first 2 parts about actually defining kind of the envelope. So there is the size of what has been created already. And then there's the envelope of what is available still within the present land use permit, in terms of accepting more waste. And like Chuck said, now you get to the part where you try to figure out how much the inflow of garbage is. So how quickly that remaining envelope is going to fill up. And of course, when you look at that over time, in the past, you can see it varies quite a bit. There are cycles that kind of go through it depending on economic activity, a bunch of other things.
Yes.
And then when we're looking forward, there are even more factors that possibly come into play because life is getting much more complex for the landfill. I'm sorry, go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to state also that Ginger put a good array together there, and which is real good. And that parallels what you written up too, which goes into more detail. But at least the array works good with economical principles where you can look at 1 and 2 on the positive side. Is that enough to negate or stay, if you will, in equilibrium with the negative side? So at least we have some parameters there with you defining them, and then with Ginger's work on that array, that if we don't get at it, the array is there for the experts to say, yeah, economically we can look at that. We can look at supply and demand and demand curves and so forth, if you will. That'll give credence to it.
Yes. So what Chuck is, so let me just orient people who aren't as familiar with what's going on. So we're really talking about in the A1 subcommittee's report, when you get to section 3 is where that is the one that's actually dealing with intake of waste, and especially intake of waste and factors influencing it into the future. So what Chuck was referring to is there is a table there, which is very nice and it's a very nice communicating device because it shows essentially what some of the factors are influencing the landfill. And it just shows that there's a positive influence, which means the landfill life is extended. There's a negative influence, which means that the landfill life is shortened. So we have to apologize a bit for the document in section 3, because if you go there, it kind of looks like a hand grenade went off in a room full of text. There is duplicate material, which is not quite the same, but very similar. And it's very confusing because a lot of material essentially has kind of arrived at the same time and has not been sorted out, into actually a workable narrative in the form that you got. So, so that's kind of the first part of section 3, is kind of talking about factors and kind of giving you arrows pointing, that they're either lengthening landfill life or they're shortening landfill life. So something like population growth would shorten landfill life, because if there's more population in the service area for the landfill, that generates more garbage per year. But of course, there's a cap on how much the landfill takes in, so that only influences a certain amount. So things get complicated very quickly. And so we've tried to identify in this section, a number of those factors and kind of to characterize them. Whereas, for example, if recycling rates were to continue, or if a recession happens and economic activity slows down, then there is less garbage produced in that population. And therefore, less garbage means not as much going into the landfill per year, which means a lengthening of the landfill's expected life. So, you know, we've tried to kind of isolate those factors and just identify, you know, kind of what you can expect from them and whether or not it's expected to be a significant number, insignificant number, that sort of thing. I mean, a lot of the significance of the impact, the amount of the impact really has to do with how much you believe that factor is actually going to be present in the future. Is it going to be a factor at all? Is there going to be a recession? You know, is there going to be economic growth? Is there going to be a landfill fire? There are just a number of factors, and we tried to do some brainstorming and kind of come up with a list and treat them. So a part which is relatively readable is the next part down, which is talking about various scenarios. And so those have graphs kind of attached to them to kind of make it to communicate visually what each of those scenarios means in terms of landfill life. And you can kind of see it playing out because the graphs go year by year. So there is a baseline operating, which is the official, I don't know if official is the right word. Republic Services they have their own forecast essentially about what is going to be happening at Coffin Butte, you know, in the lifetime. And their forecast says that they will be putting in as much as they can. So there's an intake cap of 1.1 million, and I'm simplifying, but and they say they will be able to generate, you know, they'll have that demand essentially going through the remainder of life in the landfill. And so we talk about the factors, and the scenarios that we draw out are really about, well, what happens with that scenario? So what happens if the cap goes away, for example, you know, or what happens if an expansion is approved, or what happens if there's climate change legislation and landfill is the amount going into the landfill is reduced as a result, you know, because high methane producing material is diverted. There's incentives to divert it from the landfill, etc. So that is relatively accessible to people. And so you can certainly look and kind of comment on that. You know, it certainly is appropriate to just talk about the fact that it's very hard to parse out the beginning part, because it is hard to parse out, and that's you know, quite legitimate feedback. Okay, I'm sorry, I've kind of gone on and on about that. Oh, there's also a section 4, which kind of has to do with there was initial skepticism, I would say, about some of the scenarios that were coming forward. And so section 4 really kind of lays out what the signals of these possible futures, you know, signals that we can discern now that indicate that these are actual viable, possible futures. That's really what section 4 has to do with. So enough for me. Chuck, did you have anything to add?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, some of the stuff that is really out, I remember Sam talking about the Portland Airport and landings and stuff like that, but you never know what technology would bring. Just with Zoom alone, they've cut down on a lot of their takeoffs and landings because we have a technology here. So also in the mix of solid waste, there are new technologies coming out. It's hard to look in a crystal ball, but they're starting to get some momentum behind them. Instead of sending all our resources over to China or Japan, in particular, the coffee can and the coffee tub now, a lot of them are converting that plastics to energy. So, we could go on, but they're just unfolding. And obviously, as a capital market takes over a little bit, entrepreneurs come in. I think there's even one being developed. I heard here in Albany, looking at that stuff too. So that'll be unfolding. It's just hard to unfold it in this document now without just talking generally about it instead of specifics. But our experts, when they get on board too, they probably will have more in depth on that can educate at least myself on it, if you will.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a really good point, Chuck. I mean, we really are, this is a very future-oriented section of the report. And so it clearly has kind of a relationship with the SMMP, where the SMMP is also very future-oriented. But I think so, like considerations that we had with the SMMP, like looking internationally, for example, I mean, you can see technologies which are already in place elsewhere, and this is not just technologies, but social technologies about how waste is done. And of course, Oregon is moving in this direction, by being, one of the leaders in like producer responsibility for items that are produced. You begin to enable these sorts of systems, that prevent things which have a higher use, from entering the landfill. So that's what that whole section is about. So, I think that it's really relevant to us here in this council, advisory council, to feel free to comment on those, and to kind of review the work of the subcommittee in terms of representing that. Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. In just glancing through this, I think it is an interesting section, especially the scenarios you've gone into. One question that comes to my mind, and I'm thinking of the analogy to water resources and river allocation, and the problem of over allocation in particular. The analogy with rivers is that if you have a certain number of users that are all drawing from the river, and that works in good years, but then you get a bad event, and suddenly the river is over allocated, and you have a problem. With the landfill, how this seems to work out is that there's been lots of contracts signed up that provide a certain annual flow of garbage, but then we have these stochastic events like a COVID crisis or a Lion's Head Beachy Creek fire, and suddenly there's more garbage coming in, and we get these, either, if you want to call them violations or exceedances of what was expected. Is there any discussion of that type of planning that, we've seen some patterns of what I would call stochastic variation in the inflow, so the random variability on top of sort of what's expected, how that is accounted for in the overall airspace budget?
Yeah, I don't, I'm struggling to understand your point entirely. It's a little over my head perhaps, but I think that we're up against a wall in many regards, in that there's a lot of proprietary data about the inflow to the landfill. And so, for example, business contracts, nothing about that, has been divulged. So we can't really, we can certainly speculate about them, we can make our own best guess, faced with lack of information. That's, all we can do really. And a lot of those I mean, in some cases, of course, those things can be found out quite readily, if you just call Marion County and ask them what their business relationship is with, they may indeed just tell you. So, just as one example, but there just are a number of other things which Republic has been reluctant, to divulge. Their projection saying that they're going to be able to maintain that high rate of, of intake for the next 20 years or 17 years, kind of whatever it plays out to be. We can't really examine the assumptions. We don't know what assumptions underlie that. So what assumptions about population growth or kind of whatever, there are certain things that don't seem to be in that assumption, but kind of what exactly is in just hasn't been divulged. Yeah, Chuck.
Okay.
Well, let me understand this correctly. The common denominator coming into Coffin Butte is the scale ticket. Last time I was there, they scaled it. So, and then it's attributed to where you're coming from too, which identifies what county it's coming from and municipality. So if the common denominator is tons, which it is, then everything else is density and capacity is changed from the tonnage. So to answer the question is there is a lot of data that's probably available to the county just from the scale tickets alone, by saying, matter of fact, I think I've seen it there sometimes, which county it's coming from. And then over the years, you can see a pattern from the county. But I think, it's just to talk about it here. So when the experts get on board, and I'm sure that hopefully they'll have some economists on board, that they can look at those dynamics of Washington County has grown this much, Yamhill County has grown this much, so they can start putting those different arrays together, just like you put this one array with Ginger and you together and stuff. So I think it's within the realm. It's just a matter of getting more resources and, if you will, professional staff on, so they can dive into it and divulge it a little bit better than in a better time frame than we can, I should say.
Well, I think our role is real. Yes. So I agree with you entirely, Chuck. We're not going to answer these questions. I mean, nobody is saying that we have, the resources, or the time really to do that. But I think, what's important, and I think what's important for, this advisory council is to ask the right questions. So just kind of exactly the question that Joel was putting forward, that is the one that will actually inform what experts do, as a matter of fact, get hired. So for example, the Beachy Creek fire, just brought the prospect of a wildfire coming into the vicinity of Coffin Butte. So what exactly happens if there's a wildfire, in that immediate area, with the landfill? How likely is the landfill to catch fire, and what happens to the landfill if it does? That is something that someone, I hope, is really, paying attention to. And I think an expert can say, these are the things that should be done to best protect, or, to respond, or kind of whatever is going on. So, but it requires someone to actually come forward with that question, to just say, well, what about a fire? Asking that question is really what gets that sort of preparation in place. And I don't want to be sensational. I just pulled that off the top of my head.
No, it's not sensational.
I don't want to be dooming and glooming here, but asking the questions is very important, and that's something that anyone can do. You don't have to be an expert to ask those questions.
It's relative. It's relative. What you're on point is, today we have a waste stream. Tomorrow we have an energy stream. It's just a matter of, is the economics there and technology now to change that from the other. And the next great fire, that looks like charcoal to me, it has a price for it. So I'm being somewhat facetious, but it's just a way of looking at the waste streams, and can we turn it into a resource stream, if you will.
Right.
But the good thing about the county bringing on experts, that they're already, they're knowledgeable on that. If we can help the county and the director is looking at assisting with information to pick the right one, make sure they got economists on board, make sure they got civil engineers on board, make sure they've got, I hate to say this, a geologist on board.
So, yeah, I'm sorry, Joel, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, we're talking about experts, but I wonder what we're really talking about here, because there we're talking about the SMMP process, which is going to come sometime pretty far in the future, perhaps, or at least maybe a year in the future or several years in the future before that's resolved. But the capacity issue for the current landfill is something that's going to come up in the, as I understand, in the land use process, which could be in March of this year. So I feel like we can't really defer some of these things out until some other experts come in. We are, for better or worse, we're sort of what we have, and
Yeah,
us the people. Yeah.
so that's really a good point. Whoops,
Well,
go ahead.
well,
Chuck.
yes, also the county's bringing on legal professionals too. So with legal professionals, you know, that brings experts into the field, and at that time, the experts in waste management and sustainable management. So in the introductory letter he put out January 13th, that mix is in there, if you would. It's just a matter of addressing it as the occurrences come up. And that's what's hard to forecast right now, what occurrence is going to come first.
Yeah. So, but I'll just call, refer to an example. And so this is an SMMP example. And, of the SMMPs that we looked at of other counties, there was no county that had, well, I think, I'm not sure if that's exactly true. Of the counties we looked at, I think only Metro had something in there about climate change. I think all the other counties did not actually have anything in their, in their table of contents of their materials management plans, having to do with climate change actually being a factor, in their waste future. And so, there is in the table of contents that, our subcommittee put together, but that's because essentially there are citizens who are, us who kind of insisted that it be there. And so that's the sort of, what we're talking about is, bringing forward those ideas, that's what these subcommittee reports going to the work group and then going on from there really are going to, hopefully shape essentially who gets called to the table, and what they talk about, if and when a new expansion proposal comes forward. So I hope that's helpful in reviewing the landfill size, particularly sections 3 and 4. Any other questions about that? Chuck, did you?
Oh, Chair, that's a good point to bring. It's just a matter of we're not an oracle of knowledge, but it is to bring in thoughts and perspectives and interpretations of them. And if I don't understand them, that's the reason I send to Daniel, so he does understand. Give us some insight.
Okay, good.
Insights there.
Yeah. Well, I think, Chuck, you and I, we differ about how oracular we are.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just the thing. I mean, you like to rely on experts, whereas I like to rely on my own imagination. I feel I have an A-class imagination. I can match wits with anyone imagination wise. And so, but that's why we get along so well, Chuck.
Yeah, I know, but it's good as long as, it's good. And Sam does this too. No matter how bleak the day is, a little humor will bring out the sunshine.
Excellent. Okay. So we have 10 minutes left.
History hasn't been.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Joel.
were we going to talk about the landfill history or the history part of the document, or did I miss that somehow?
Let's see. We should do that now. I'm sorry, we glossed over that part.
Yeah, because I actually have an awful lot of comments on that.
Okay, cool.
And probably the most important thing is the timeline. And I think I'll probably just mark that up because it's going to be a lot of detail there. But I think the timeline is really important. This is something that everyone's going to look at. It's a picture, and there are inaccuracies, misstatements, things that are outright wrong, some things that are just kind of silly, like suggesting that farming only started in the 1900s. But you know, that's pretty harmless. But saying that for instance, that the 2005 DEQ record of decision stated that the site was in compliance is just factually wrong. I went through that entire document, and there's nowhere in it where it says that the site was in compliance. What it did was lay out conditions to meet compliance, things that VLI would have to, I think it was VLI or Allied Waste at the time, they would have to, for instance, decommission a well in order to come into compliance, and they were given a deadline of a year to do that, and they were supposed to set up monitoring wells. And so that process of compliance is still ongoing, but it's been misrepresented in the timeline and also in the main text. Yeah, another comment was, to me, there's just an overemphasis on Soap Creek Valley. I don't even live in Soap Creek Valley, and I'm a neighbor, and but there's this Soap Creek Valley here, Soap Creek Valley there, and it makes it seem like the only people who actually live anywhere near the landfill are in Soap Creek Valley. And I thought we sort of tried to cover that in the neighborhood tour. We made a point of going over towards North Albany, looking at Palestine, all the houses up in the hills there. We didn't manage to get to Suver to the north of us, and we didn't get to Lewisburg. We drove past it. But there's a lot of, I mean, I think it's like 10% of the population of Benton County lives within this more or less 5-mile radius, where they're in the view shed, they're in the odor shed, they're in the litter shed, if we could come up with coin terms. And that there's no mention of that in the document. It says there's Soap Creek Valley people, and then there's farmland, or, you know, and E.E. Wilson. So that's kind of a major overarching point. And I think and where it becomes important is that I know that it's been stated that Soap Creek people are just being NIMBYs, but there's a lot more people that have this in their backyard. So it is actually a pretty important point.
No, yeah. I'm
sorry, maybe I shouldn't rant too much. So yeah, if there's any feedback on those things, I do have more things. But.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. You know, I wasn't really paying very much attention when the history part came together. I was more focused on the future end. So those points all seem really good to me. So Marge and then Chuck.
Yeah, Joel, I think that's a really good point. And I wish you brought it up earlier so that we could have addressed it. Because I can see now that there has been an emphasis on Soap Creek Valley in the document, partly because there's so much information available because of Zyback's work. And I think that that is how we got sidetracked to Soap Creek Valley is because there's such an excellent stream of information about that area. Yeah. But it is a wider area. And as you point out, the whole corridor, I mean, there are people in Polk County who are affected. There are people in North Albany who can see the landfill from North Albany Road. Yeah. And now what I do want to say though is that the Soap Creek area, I think what we were trying to do there, that is all like very early in the history. We're not talking about Soap Creek Valley in 1983 or in 2000. We're talking about it in the 1800s and the early 1900s, because it's that is the area that Coffin Butte exists in, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's one side of it. I appreciate, yeah, what I'll do is I'll send in comments and hopefully there's still time to fix things. And I think really the important document that unfortunately it wasn't documented very well. The neighborhood tour, there were some notes taken by ICM staff, and I'll have comments on those too. They didn't really accurately capture what we did, where we went, what we talked about. And that was really, it was a meeting actually of the working group, and what went on in the work group in the neighborhood tour, a big part of that never really came into this document. So I'll have some input on that. But it was part of the process and it should be represented, and I'll try to give you some constructive words on that. Yeah, and there's also there's some things missing. There's a couple of leachate incidents that are left out of the timeline. There was the 1996 issue where they had to dump 3 million gallons into the river directly. There was a 2000 incident that shows up in the monitoring reports, still being detected in monitoring well 23. You know, these things, I don't know if they ever came up, but they are things that were events in the landfill operation that show there have been some problems. And also there was the issue of the Helms well being decommissioned, was taken out somehow. That was in there in one draft.
No, it's back in the draft. It's back in. It's not in the timeline because the timeline is kind of up leveled. I mean, I see that the what is in the timeline is that Allied Waste purchases the landfill from the Bunn brothers. I mean, that is the, I mean, we've got what, 36. Oh, well, Ginger has a comment. She hasn't said anything yet. So I'd yield to Ginger.
It's got to be brief though. We only have 4 minutes left. Ginger, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be really, really fast. I don't want to interject too much into this meeting because I know this is your purview, but I just wanted to convey to Joel that part of the weakness of this process is that what you're seeing is old already, in that Marge and Mark Henkels and I have already gone back and done revisions on the history that have not yet been provided to SWAC. And so I feel like, especially when we're talking about the Helms well, for example, March provided me with some additional information. And so that did end up back into the text, as well as the leachate issues that you were talking about. And so just to try to kind of clarify that and keep it in mind that that document is still evolving, and that some of the points you're bringing up are being addressed because Marge and Mark have already brought them to our attention. So that's all I want to say.
Is there, thanks, Ginger. Yeah, is there something more recent that, I mean, I have until tomorrow. I'm leaving for a couple of memorial services over the weekend, but if there's something that I could see tomorrow that would help me to be more efficient in my comments.
So I'm just going to, you know, to me, that's like crazy making. You know, we have been really tasked with responding to draft 3. And so we should respond to draft 3, you know, even if those comments, you know, if those comments have indeed been taken care of, you know, in future iterations, then I think that's all good. But to try, you know, to hold anything back and try to check more recent, you know, believe me, that's just that's a paper chase that you'll never get out of. So, you know, our charter is really to respond to this draft that's been put forward. And so I would really just want us to focus on that. So Chuck, I know you've been having your hand up there, but it's got to be quick because we only have 2 minutes left. And
No, I
have
just
things to say.
Yeah, I just want to thank Marge and everybody on that history thing. And what I really appreciate is learning about Greenberry, who actually burnt the town down. And on the conversely speaking, south of Corvallis, there's a siding there that's Greenberry, and that's been there for quite a while. And they only name a siding from Southern Pacific after somebody who shipped a lot, and he cut down the forest to ship out. So there's irony in that if you read into it, and I really appreciate what they're saying because it brought a chuckle out.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, it's time for us to wrap up, you guys. Thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. Again, please go back to the document, kind of knowing what we do know now, and get your comments down in writing. So you might want to have, so having page numbers for the comments that you put in, when you're on a certain page, to note that page is really going to make my job a lot easier. And I really encourage you to, to submit the comments kind of all kinds that are going to be helpful, you think, to the people who, for the work group, and then going back to the subcommittees in terms of tightening up their product. And, I can just speak from my own experience that, being on a subcommittee, you really lose the perspective of how it looks from outside. And so for comments to be saying like this is really tight, this is really good, that's a good thing for people to hear. That'd be a good thing for me to hear. But also, the comments just like going, this is impenetrable or whatever. I mean, that sort of very general sort of comment I think would be helpful. And again, we are kind of the public representative. So if you think about interested public people coming, to this document, they're kind of relying on us to give pushback for them. But also those specific comments, like the ones that you were just describing, Joel, those are very valuable, those are even more valuable, right? Because we want things to be factually accurate. So last statements by anyone? Yeah, Joel.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I did appreciate all the work that Marge she put into the history document, but I just
Will and Mark
trying
Henkel.
not, and Mark, yeah, I don't want to be too negative. These were just some things that popped up for me. So but I'll try to be helpful and constructive. So.
Okay. Darren Nichols has his hand up.
Oh, thank you. Yes, Darren.
Hey, good evening, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the robust discussion and the feedback. I appreciate it. I'm sorry you can't see my camera, so it doesn't seem to be working, but I just wanted to double check the process whereby SWAC members will send their comments to you. I thought I heard early on that you were asking for them to send them to you privately. And I just want to remind SWAC that any writings that members make that are leading towards a decision by the body are public record and must be disclosed publicly. So otherwise SWAC is having essentially a serial meeting that's outside the public view. If we can help find a way for that process to happen, I'd like to just make sure we protect the integrity of SWAC's feedback into the Benton County Talks Trash.
Okay, great. Yes. So Daniel had read us that riot act a little earlier in the program. So we have heard that. So but we'll emphasize again. So CC, the comments do come to me because I am compiling them. But you should CC the talk trash talk and work group.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. I just want to remind the members that we're trying to protect the deliberations here so they're valid and not subject to attack later.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much for
okay, and thank you
bringing that up again.
Thank you for the discussion.
Yep. Okay, members. Thank you so much. It was very good to hear from all of you, and your engagement is very inspiring.
Yeah, thank you, Ken, and Mark's gone, but gute Besserung, I guess they say in Germany.
Yes, quite the trooper for us.
Yeah, Chair, I just glad to see that Ginger is back up and going. I know she had a battle with COVID there, but it's good that she's up and going. So appreciate that.
Thanks, Dirk. I only hope that Mark, and if Joel's getting the funk too, I hope everybody's back
Oh,
to full speed at our next meeting. So,
For me, it's just a cold, I think. It's or a bit of a, yeah.
yeah, you've already had it, haven't you, Joel?
Yeah. Yeah. A
Because
couple
that's what I
times.
thought.
Yeah.
So, all right. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks.
Yes, indeed. Good night, everyone. Thank you, all the public out there participating. We appreciate you tuning in with us.
Good night, all.